Good evening, everybody. This is Brian and Brian for Breaking Down Security, episode 9, March 22nd, 2014.
Hey.
Hey. So, what's on the agenda for this week? Let's see. We are going to talk about frameworks, and we have one in particular we're going to talk about, but we want to have a little backstory about how frameworks come into being and how they, the differences between some of them. We're going to talk about regulatory frameworks, and we're going to talk about best practice frameworks, because there is a difference. It's very subtle, but it's a vast importance to this subject at hand.
I don't know too much about frameworks. What are we talking about here?
Well, a framework is, rules or guidelines that are used to, in many cases, help protect a network. A lot of times you'll have frameworks that explain processes. Some frameworks are technical in nature, some are advisory in nature.
So like ITIL is a framework?
ITIL is a framework.
Okay.
It's like a document type framework for making,
IT service management. Yeah, for services specifically. Okay. So we're talking about security frameworks then.
Not just security frameworks. There's HIPAA. HIPAA is a framework that not only encompasses IT and information security, but also HR and processes, and information sharing as well.
Okay.
You have PCI, of course, which is a regulatory framework. You have to follow it usually if you are, depending on what class level you are, you have to either do a survey on an index card and basically go, okay, yeah, we're good, or you have to have an auditor come in if you do so many processing of credit cards a month or a year.
So when somebody says PCI audit, they're really talking about you have to follow the PCI framework, right?
That is correct.
And it was created by credit card companies in order to get the people who use their credit card specifically, to follow these sets of guidelines to hopefully make them more secure, because, they don't want everybody with a Visa card to get hacked. Visa doesn't.
Yeah, Visa, MasterCard, I want to say Discover's involved.
So it kind of forces companies to become, on the surface more secure, right?
That's right, and those are not those are regulatory frameworks, or those ones that require, they have enforcement behind them. You have to follow PCI requirements. You have to follow SSAE 16, for instance, if you're a cloud service provider. Used to be SAS 70 for you folks out there. HIPAA is also another one that recently didn't have a lot of bite until recently, when the Office of Civil Rights and Health and Human Services set up the audits and started doing massive fines for people. So those are examples of regulatory frameworks. ITIL is an example of a process framework where you set up processes, and it's kind of like a meta process. You use that process to set up other processes for IT service management.
Okay, so it's the company's choice if they want to follow ITIL. They set it up themselves, right, and follow these processes and hopefully get better as a company as a result.
Sure. There's ITIL. There's also, you could use, I think Six Sigma is another one where you can create green belts and black belts that, you follow guidelines to help process improvement. There's also ISO guidelines for those things too, which we get into ISO guidelines, you start talking about what they call best practice frameworks. You have your ISO 27002, your risk management stuff. You have your, cloud service alliance.
So if you have dealings with, say, the U.S. federal government, you have to be under FISMA, something like that. Okay.
Yeah, but that's a regulatory one. You have to follow that if you're going to do any kind of government contracts or deal with government data as a contractor or what have you. Best practice frameworks are more like the ISO guidelines, or ones that show you how to be, how you should do these things. There are no regulatory guidelines. It is an optional thing. Usually ISO. A lot of the other frameworks like PCI and HIPAA are based on ISO. So if you say, okay, we're a big hospital or a big payment processing company, we have to follow SSAE 16, we have to follow PCI, we have to follow FSMA, we have to do X, Y, and Z as well with this, bank or whatever. Like a bank may have specific regulatory guidelines.
Okay.
The ISO standards usually, they do a really good job because they're international. They're based on they're an international standard. You can map whatever requirements from those other frameworks to an ISO standard, which is helpful because if you just use an ISO standard, you will often find yourself compliant with a number of different guidelines, so you don't have to worry about, oh, am I PCI compliant, or oh, am I HIPAA compliant? If you're ISO 27000 compliant, you're good to go. ISO 9000 is another one for the industrial. ISO 9001,
So the ISOs kind of supersede the regulatory? Or is it mixed?
It's like you've got compliance, which is not security. So it's like a baseline to try to get, some general security in there. Then you have what I would say the ISO standards are, which are just above compliance, but maybe not as good as it's like going the extra mile. So if you follow the ISO standards, you're going to be PCI compliant, but then you're going to be so much more. Because like PCI requires, logging of X, Y, and Z. Well, ISO may say, okay, yeah, you're going to do X, Y, and Z, but you also need to do, A, B, and C as well. So when the PCI auditor comes in, he says, show me your logs. And you'd be like, okay, we got our PCI stuff, but we're following ISO, which, we're doing above and beyond PCI, or we're doing above and beyond SSAE 16. So doing not the regulatory ones, but often in many cases, you have to do a lot more work to be ISO compliant, but in doing so, you'll find yourself
in a better position
across the board.
Okay.
So one of the ones that we're going to talk about tonight is the framework for improving critical infrastructure cybersecurity, and it was ratified last month. As a matter of fact, it was created. Version 1.0 was released February 12th, 2014. And it came out of an executive order, 13636, that President Obama signed a year previous to that, so February 12, 2013, as a way to enhance security for the nation's critical infrastructure.
Okay, so is it something that companies have to follow? Is it optional? What is that?
Well, it's funny. We'll post a link to the document online. It's about 40 pages. But the interesting thing was, if you read on page 1, they say it's a set of industry standards and best practices. So what you hear is best practices, so it doesn't really have an enforcement behind it, that help organizations manage cybersecurity risks.
Okay.
So it's an ISO standard kind of thing.
Okay, and how's it different from the ISO standards?
Well, that's kind of funny. When you go through the document, it explains how the framework was created in collaboration with government and private sector people. There are 3 different sections of it. There's the framework core, the framework profile, and the implementation tiers. We mentioned that one model or one framework we didn't mention is one called the COBIT maturity model. You can find it, I think it's free of charge on the ISACA, the ISACA website. And what it does is it's a process type of framework where you can measure how well your process maturity is. So let's say you have a change management process where you have to make firewall changes, for instance. If you're a small company, you may just call down to the IT guy and go, hey, I need you to open this port. And he goes, sure, why not?
Boom, it's done.
Boom, it's done. There's, there may not be any documentation. There may not be any overhead. There may not be any oversight. There may not be any auditing. That would be what they would consider to be like a level 0 for maturity. Level 1 might be you got 2 people, you've got a template, you're training people on how to do it, but there's no real documentation on how it works. It's just, we've always done it this way. That's kind of like that. It goes up all the way to like level 5 where you've got, change management meetings. You've got templates and documentation saying that, okay, we started the process here, it ended here. Level 5 is also interesting because you often have third companies come in to audit your processes to make sure that everything is good. So that'd be like a level 5 on the COBIT maturity model.
Okay.
The reason I went off on that tangent was the cybersecurity framework, if you were to follow it, it's a 41-page document which explains a lot of, the framework introductions, and they say that it complements but does not replace organizations' risk management process in their cybersecurity program. They talk about the framework tiers, and on page, I marked everything down in my little annotations. In page 9, at the very bottom, it says, while organizations identify tier 1 partial are encouraged to consider moving towards tier 2, the tiers do not represent maturity levels, but they say progression to higher tiers is encouraged. If you look at the tiers, it works almost like the COBIT maturity model. Because if you go to tier 1, it says risk management process. The organizational risk management processes are not formalized, and risk is managed in an ad hoc and sometimes reactive manner, which is almost like the COBIT level 1, where it's like you call down to the IT guy and say, open a port for me, and he says, okay.
So you're saying they just copied it or what?
Well, if you look at Appendix A and they talk about the different, they have 5 different types of, levels. They called them like identify,
protect, detect.
Yeah, respond and recover. If you look at each one of those, they break that down to unique identifiers, and then they talk about asset management and governance and assessment. They map this cybersecurity framework to the ISO standard, to the COBIT model. What they're saying is you don't have to use the cybersecurity framework. It's nice if you do, but if you are already using the ISO 27001 standard or NIST version, NIST document, NIST 800 documents, or the COBIT model, you're already doing the cybersecurity framework. We don't want to upset the boat. We don't want you to try to implement the cybersecurity framework if you're already implementing the ISO standards. So this is like a best practice meta framework, which says, okay, you need to, if you're not already using these ISO standards, you can use the cybersecurity framework model. And, by using the cybersecurity framework model, you could use one of these other best practice frameworks as well.
I don't know. Well, it sounds like it's just, I don't know. It's just one of many, that are somewhat the same. Yeah. That's what it sounds like to me. I don't know who's going to follow this if they already follow something like COBIT or they're working towards an ISO standard anyway.
A lot of companies who don't have, are trying to keep their heads above water with PCI already. I find it hard to believe they would want to implement anything like this because of the additional cost that's going to be involved. I mean, trying to become ISO standard is bad. PCI is bad enough, but ISO or even becoming HIPAA compliant is difficult if you're not already compliant with at least a baseline compliance framework.
Right. Yeah. This is going above and beyond what you would need for, say, PCI, obviously. And I see a lot of companies just once they're PCI compliant, okay, we're good, and they move on. They could care less about any other standards, right? I'm not saying they don't want to be more secure than they are, but for instance, Target, they kept saying, well, we're PCI compliant, we passed. Well, I guess that wasn't good enough, right?
Yeah. Well, what's the impetus for them to go beyond compliance if that's the only thing they have to worry about? Once they get PCI compliant by their auditor, their QSA, in actuality, I believe if you read the PCI requirements, you are compliant at that instant. Yeah. The minute you make another change to your architecture in any way, be it a firewall change or you take a server offline, you are not really, in my opinion, this is my opinion, but I've also heard other people echo this when I would listen to other podcasts, you are no longer PCI compliant.
Interesting.
If you're not if you don't document everything, if you don't do exactly as you're supposed to.
Right.
So a PCI is a snapshot in time. You were compliant Tuesday at 3:30 p.m. when your QSA signed the document. If you made a change 9 hours later to your firewall, you have to go through the whole process again and have him, document everything and sign off on it for you to be PCI compliant at 12:01 a.m.
Okay. Technicalities.
Technicalities, sure. Now, we've kind of dogged the security framework, but there are some good things in this. If you're following this, one of the things they mention is they want to protect privacy and civil liberties when, implementing
Is that something unique? I mean, what in here is unique to this framework?
I think that's pretty unique. I mean, the ISO standards I don't think have privacy requirements in them. I could be wrong, but I don't remember reading the ISO 27000 and it having explicit language about, if you read on page 15, it says privacy and civil liberty implications may arise when personal information is used, collected, processed, maintained, or disclosed in connection with an organization's cybersecurity activities.
Well, they don't use those words, but they talk about PII.
They do talk about PII and safeguarding the PII.
Mm-hmm.
But a lot of this is maintaining critical infrastructure in the United States. Now, that critical infrastructure is usually defined as, what helps the country run and maintain, a basic quality of life, which for some people you think infrastructure, you think power supply, power plants, you think,
yep.
Roads and bridges, you think, I don't know.
Well, credit cards, that's critical infrastructure. Banking,
yeah. Finances in this case, sure.
Things like that. The things the government cares about, right?
Yeah.
They might not care about your basket weaving company, but they'll care about you if you're a bank. And you've just leached out, millions of dollars to, I don't know, mafia organizations in another country, right?
Yeah.
Then they care.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah. They were, it was just interesting to hear how they were calling out the fact that, when you are, reviewing your practices, you need to have the idea of what kind of information is being shared. They worried about, how a cybersecurity program might incorporate privacy principles like data minimization. It was just interesting why they would have put that in here. I would assume this was on the heels of all of the NSA issues. And when you go down into the appendix area, they talk about minimizing the use of external data storage devices like USB thumb drives. And
yeah, so what's that organization that I think you're a member of? Am I supposed to say that out loud?
Huh? Oh, you mean InfraGard?
InfraGard, yes.
InfraGard. Yeah, I am a member of InfraGard, which the idea of that was to have, it's through the FBI, but it was a way to liaise with local corporations or companies in an effort to share cybersecurity information in the form of bulletins.
Okay, in the form of bulletins, but you should be in a company that has some sort of critical infrastructure, right? Work for a company.
Sure, that's the idea. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
So, all right.
So if you work for Austin Energy and say in Austin, Texas, or if you're a member of the Seattle Port Authority up here, where shipping comes in from other countries, and you might somebody from a foreign country ships a dirty bomb in, you would want to be a part of an organization that would allow a free sharing of information from relevant intelligence sources to, Joe dock worker or, the guy who runs the manifest lists for the ships.
Okay, so frameworks, I would say in general, they're a good thing to follow. It takes a while for a company that's not there to get there, to be compliant with a framework. It takes a lot of resources, a lot of people I know when certain frameworks say you have to have a person that is designated to do this job. And so you have to make somebody, say, the change manager or, the problem manager or the incident manager. You have to have all those people assigned to those tasks. And so it takes, one person can do multiple jobs, but it takes a lot of resources to, follow these frameworks correctly.
Yeah. You were talking, that's a framework, right? Using problem and incident and change management folks.
Mm-hmm.
So the change manager could implement a change, but there also has to be like a vice change manager.
They're in charge of the process. If you have a change manager, they're in charge of the process, or a change owner, a process owner. So these frameworks take a lot of energy, but you end up theoretically better as an organization as a result. So you're better.
Sure.
You're better prepared. You don't have as many problems in your organization if you follow these frameworks correctly.
Mm-hmm.
In theory, like I said, I think we need frameworks in, other aspects of life too, right? So I was driving to work yesterday, and this guy walks out to check his mail in his bathrobe, and I'm going, what? Seriously? And
I'm not shocked by that.
He wasn't, a guy that you'd find in a magazine like some model. No. Not even close. But, there's a gust of wind, and, there's some things you just can't unsee, right?
Oh, God.
So, I don't know. Well, maybe we need frameworks for that as well. Just...
You mean frameworks for life?
How not to be, but that same morning, that same drive, actually, there was a stop sign, and this trucker stopped at a stop sign. I was kind of next to him and kind of behind him, and he rolls down the window. It was an 18-wheeler, reaches out this plastic clear container full of urine and pours it out onto the street about 6 feet from my vehicle. And I'm going, wow, maybe, is that public urination? Is that against the law? What is that? So
I don't know.
So I don't know. It was a bad day from the start.
You have some interesting story. I have never actually had that happen to me before.
Yeah. And it was either he poured Gatorade in a large plastic container and poured it out, which I doubt, or it was. So yeah, maybe we should all live by a certain framework of human decency, right?
Yeah, we all have processes we're supposed to live by. But life itself is a series of processes. You get up in the morning, you take your shower, you wash your face, there are processes within the processes. In the shower, you probably wash your body in a certain order. You get out and you dry off in a certain order. You leave the house at a certain time during the day. You follow certain directions to get to work every morning. You probably take the same route, even though technically from a security standpoint you're not supposed to. Kind of randomize that. But you follow a process every day. It's just, they're not best practice. I don't know what those would be called. There's, I guess it's just a way to get through your day.
Right.
So, I don't, so getting back to the cybersecurity framework, I don't like the term cybersecurity. It's kind of old and busted. I do think that if you don't have anything in place, it's better than nothing. But I also believe that there are probably better frameworks out there because, one, this one was made in a course of a year after being told by the president to make this, to protect, this is a NIST document. It was created by NIST, the people who invariably worked with the NSA and, collaborated with them. But I like to believe NIST is actually out trying to do something good. So they had a year to make this. So you got to keep that in mind when you're making it. Many of the ISO standards take years to get through because they have to be peer reviewed.
Yeah.
So, I would look at it from that point of view. The ISO standards are vetted. They're international. They are, peer reviewed. They have conventions they hold to debate certain points of it before it's ratified and blessed. The new ISO 27000 standard, which is mentioned heavily in this cybersecurity framework document, just came out with version 2013, just came out last year with a brand new version. So I would say if you want to follow a framework, use an ISO standard or use a COBIT standard for your processes. You can even use 800-53, which is another NIST document, but it's it has been heavily vetted by the community at large as well. So
you're saying this one is the new thing, not necessarily heavily vetted by people in the IT community.
IT, IS, process, privacy people. Yeah, I mean it's had a year to be. I don't know how much can be done in a year. I mean, I can make a framework that just says, hey, you need to do X, Y, and Z. You can follow these other frameworks, to make that happen. When I worked as a consultant, one of the things I did was I took the HIPAA requirements and I mapped them to other various frameworks like the COBIT model and the PCI model. If you wanted to use the ISO model, these were the ISO chapters or ISO sections you had to follow and maintain to be be HIPAA compliant as well.
Okay.
I mean, anybody can do this. So it's kind of like it reminds me of that XKCD, the Randall Munroe comic out there, where the first panel says, "Man, we've got 14 standards. What are we going to do? Let's make one standard that incorporates all the 14 different standards."
Oh yeah. And then what happened in this case?
Yeah, 6 months later, dang it, we have 15 standards.
Yeah.
So I see this as just kind of being lost in the mix when you've already got established standards like the ISO and the COBIT and the NIST standards that are already out there, the NIST 800 series.
So yeah, I would just choose one of the proven commodities out there. Those that have been around for a while, that have been poked and prodded and adjusted over time. This one seems like it's a hodgepodge of other standards, maybe?
Yes, I agree with that assessment. I would also say that, unless there was, something specific in there where, it required, there's no teeth to it, so you don't have to follow it. It's not a requirement. It's not like you're going to get fined if you don't follow the cybersecurity framework. But if you don't have anything, maybe you could use it as a frame of reference to bounce to other standards.
Yeah, well, maybe it'll have teeth to it in the coming months or years. Never know. Never know why they do it.
I hope not, but because I already think in many ways we're already suffering from an overuse of regulatory frameworks. If we just had one framework, then we would be better. But then, which framework do we follow?
Yeah.
Government already require, we already have PCI, which is a non-government regulatory framework. Then you've got your FISMAs, you've got your HIPAAs, and then you've got SSA 16, which was made by God knows who. I forget. It escapes me at this time.
Yeah. Anything interesting happened this week?
Well, I was on a fun vacation from my job.
Awesome.
Yes, I got to move into my brand new house. I'm sitting in my new office, which it's nice to have my own office. So got unpacked. So I've been working on some videos for the podcast here. I wanted to maybe do some technical podcast stuff. I was actually working on a regular expression video cast that would show people how to, I was inspired by the Paul Security Weekly technical one done by Allison Nixon on how to do Perl compatible regular expressions. And I wanted to do one on sed and awk. And, I was going to take a big text file and show people how to use it. So that'll hopefully be coming out in the next week or two. So stay tuned and wait for that. We may also have some interviews coming up soon.
We're going to try.
Yeah?
Yep, we're definitely going to try. No promises,
Excellent.
though. So
no promises, yeah. If it happens, it happens. I would say better than 50% on though. I don't want to say 100% because shit happens and things fall through. So if they happen, they happen. We know that you guys don't come just to listen to our awesome interview. Well, wait, actually, I think most people do, which is kind of sad. So, well, I hope we make you laugh. So let's just close this up. So, cybersecurity framework is okay. We're gonna post a link so you can look at it yourself, and
it's not just for the U.S. I mean, it's for anybody.
Yeah, I mean, anybody could follow this. It's really U.S.-centric, though. I don't think it has any, they talk about critical infrastructure for the United States. It says vital to the United States. So
you can insert any country there, right?
Yeah, I would imagine that you could, run a regular expression on it and substitute U.S. for Bangladesh or, North Korea. North Korea, best Korea in this case. So.
Okay. Well, keep those bathrobes tightened, right?
Yeah, exactly. And, work on your processes. Obviously, his bathrobe process needs to be
It needs to be fine-tuned a little bit, so.
Yeah, to plan for eventualities like wind or whatever, so. All right. So, Mr. Betcher, I will see you at work on Monday. And everybody, this was the Breaking Down Security podcast, episode 9. You can find us on Twitter. I'm at Brian Break. Mr. Betcher is at...
Betcher Pwned.
Betcher Pwned. That's right.
Yes. Keep that risk management. Make sure you write down wind.
Wind. That's right. So... we have breakingsecurity.com. That's break is my last name, BRAKEING.com. Breaking Security. And that was it for this week. So if you like what you are hearing, please give us a comment or two. Find us on Twitter and follow us and say, hey, you enjoyed it.
iTunes.
We're on iTunes. Leave us comments on iTunes as well. That's great.
All right.
We're getting... All right.
That's a wrap.
Yep. Have a good week, everybody.